invite Ms. Setsuko Saya, Director Cabinet Office Japan as Chair, and Dr. V. Thiruppugazh, Joint Secretary NDMA India as Co-Chair. I also request following speakers to kindly join the Chair and Co-Chair on the dais. Dr. Krishna Vatsa, Global Advisor on Climate Risk Management, Mr. Sanjay Mathur, Regional Director, Asia Region UN Ops, Mr. Mani Ram Gelal, Deputy Director General, Ministry of Urban Development, Nepal, Mr. Deepak Singh, Senior Disaster Risk Management Specialist, World Bank. For further deliberation, I hand over the session to the Chair.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from good lunch, and I'm very happy to we're happy to have the final session on recovery and reconstruction. I'm Setsuko Saya from Japan Cabinet Office, Director for Disaster Management Bureau, and we have very distinguished speakers. I don't name everyone to speed up, but we have very happy to have a co-chair here with me. Before making my introductory remarks, I would like to invite a delegation from Mongolia, Mr. Vatsa. He said he likes to mention about the AMCDRR before he leaves this conference, but do I have him, Mr. Vatsa from Mongolian delegation? No, seeing none, then we will start my introductory remarks. Can you please put on the presentation, please? Thank you very much. We have a very interesting session today about critical infrastructure, and this session is about after disaster happens. We have a very interesting set of questions from the Secretariat, and the first is about the reporting of mid-size and small disasters. It is very relevant because of the Sendai monitoring and data collection. The second question about what is a critical infrastructure and the service recover quickly, and how rapidly can the service be recovered. But on the other hand, the question number 3 is about the quick recovery of providing essential services are required, but also in the process of build back better, that might take longer time to come to a conclusion of the progress. So how do we make balance between the essential service delivery and also build back better? The fourth question is also very interesting. We talked a lot about financing strategies, about reconstruction recovery. 5 about transferring risk, as we discussed before lunch. And also 6th question is about institutionalize the learning process of after each disasters. So taking the privilege of the chair, I'd like to add some comments about the questions that are relevant about recovery and reconstruction of critical infrastructure, because this recovery and reconstruction is based on the concept of build back better, which is come from the Sendai framework. I think there are several very interesting questions that maybe you'd like to explore, and some of the questions were discussed before the lunchtime. Combination of structured and non-structured measures, that was also discussed, but that is very important. Maybe the important thing is about non-structured measures, because that will be complementary to the structured measures by building critical infrastructure. Japan has set out a very interesting criteria for high frequency and minor damage disasters. The infrastructure, the structured measures, have to be perfectly respond to such high frequency minor damage disasters. But on the other hand, low frequency and major damage disasters like huge scale tsunami or very huge scale earthquakes, the non-structured measures are very, very also important. So those structured and non-structured measures have to be always combined together. The second issue is reconstruction about infrastructure itself should be discussed in the context of entire affected regions recovery, because infrastructure is not an independent kind of function. It is connected to the regional development plan anyways. So maybe the discussion about how the region will recover entirely should be also part of the could be interested to be part of the discussion of recovery and reconstruction. And also some mention about the sustainable development goals, in particular the recovery of economy and society. That is also a part of the Build Back Better, and also it is also related to infrastructure development, because I'm saying this because this is time frame is the reconstruction of Tohoku region after 2011 earthquake, and the government is measuring how much the recovery process has been proceeding in each sector, like evacuation, supporting evacuees or housing reconstruction and community development, and also those elements, in particular the housing reconstruction and infrastructure development are in general in good progress. In general, it is just in general. But the most critical part about the reconstruction is reviving the economy and also the livelihood of people and industry employment, and developing regaining their community. Those part of social dimension and environmental dimensions are also indispensable part of the Build Back Better. And then if the critical infrastructure development can also take consideration into such SDGs concept, might be also interesting topics to discuss. Now I'd like to share Japan's experience, taking the privilege again as the chair to be the first speaker of today, to present some Japanese lessons we learned from the 2011 earthquake. I have three kind of proposals how we can improve our recovery and reconstruction of critical infrastructure. First, right after the earthquake in 2011, Japan has established an Act on Reconstruction after large-scale disaster in 2013. This act could be applicable for any large-scale disasters. It displays very interesting points, like the first point is having the headquarters at the Prime Minister's level is very important to show the leadership, and also have the long-term vision of the recovery must be also indispensable. That is the first thing that this Act on Reconstruction mentioned. But also, the first proposal I like to raise is relevant to some of the questions. How to take balance between speed and also the quality of recovery. In this sense, maybe you can lead in the third point. It says that affected municipalities may establish an association which is comprised of diverse stakeholders to discuss the recovery plan, which means the recovery plan cannot be decided very short discussion. It needs discussion among the entire related stakeholders so that they can have complete consensus among the citizens, private sector, and maybe any local authorities. Of course, that process takes some time to come to a conclusion of the recovery plan. But it's very important that maybe that might deteriorate the speed of providing services or providing infrastructure. But without consensus of citizens or private sector, the recovery plan would not be implemented, actually. So maybe the Japan's message here is to do not prioritize speed, rather than put importance on the quality of recovery. That is the first message I'd like to propose here. Second issue is about the funding. Funding, it's an important topic about where to find funding. After the Tohoku earthquake, 2011, after the first 5 years, the national government has spent $228 billion for the reconstruction of Tohoku. It's a big amount of money. Of course, maybe Japan is a relatively developed country, so maybe we have some kind of resource to finance such a big amount of budget. But there is even not for Japan, we don't have any magic pocket. Where the money comes from is that we increase tax, we issue bonds, and also reduce spending. The reduced spending includes reduce government officials' salary by 10% for first 3 years. It's a lot of a sacrifice for the entire population, but somehow we managed to have such amount of money. But still, the money itself is somewhere there, somehow it's not an easy solution, but somehow there. But also, the proper implementation of spending itself is a problem. So the national government has to support a lot of the subnational government, because even though the national government prepared a lot of budget, certain amount of monies were not spent because the project was not ready. Of course, there are many problems about the bidding processes. Like many bid region cases occurred also because money is all over. So the national government needs pretty good guidance of the subnational government so that they can implement such project properly. And also I have to say that maybe in the amount, according to the research of the OECD, 70% of infrastructures are built in terms of money by subnational government. So it means maybe, of course, subnational government is not is compared to the national level. They do not have a larger pockets. They need any support from the national level. Of course, it is financially, but also in terms of the capacity. This is my third proposal. We asked the subnational governments which experienced large-scale flooding in the past 5 years. When was your last time when your city had experienced similar level of disasters? 46% of municipalities said that was their first time, and 23% of municipalities said they experienced a similar scale more than 31 years ago. So it means most of the municipalities, it is for the first time they experience such managing disasters and also managing the recovery and reconstruction processes. So in this sense, the national government has to support the capacity of subnational government. Supporting the capacity of subnational government sometimes take the form of deregulation and delegation of authority from the national level to the subnational level, so that they have more kind of capacity or options to implement the projects or implement anything. But also in some cases, when subnational governments are not able to handle the situation, sometimes higher levels of government may step in on behalf of the subnational government, so that higher levels of government can support the implementation of the project. This is also stipulated in the Basic Act of Reconstruction, that sometimes the national government may take the leadership, which has to be done by the subnational government, but it has to be done at the national level because the subnational government is not able to handle this situation because it's their first time to face such a situation. Those are, sorry for a long introduction as a chair, and also sharing the experience of Japan about the 3 issues, speed of reconstruction, and national governments should support national governments should support subnational government financially, and the third element is about the capacity building at the subnational level. So I stop here, and I'd like to invite other speakers. First speaker is from UNDP, Mr. Krishna. Please, if you like to, do you like to use it or? Yeah, okay.
So, very good afternoon to all of you. I would like to begin by thanking the Government of India, National Disaster Management Authority, and the UNISDR for extending me this invitation. It's so great to be here. It's a niche area, I would say, and the quality of discussion has been outstanding, and I'm so glad to be here. If one country that has most to teach in the area of infrastructure recovery, the subject of the afternoon discussion, it is Japan, and I'm so glad you are here chairing the session, and your presentation also gives us a very good idea of the scale of recovery that Japan achieved after the Kobe earthquake and the Great Japan earthquake. Thank you very much. Infrastructure recovery is a big area, and it actually touches all the aspects of governance and decision making. You know, it starts with the assessment, goes on to planning, procurement, implementation, monitoring, risk reduction, and standard setting. So almost the entire cycle of disaster management gets reflected in the process of the infrastructure recovery. I started with the assessment, you know, and one good thing that has happened in the recent past is that we have standardized the assessment at the global level through this post-disaster needs assessment, PDNAs. Last 6-7 years, we have conducted about 55 PDNAs across different countries. And we have a wealth of data on infrastructure damages and losses. So, actually you can get to know a lot about how the infrastructure, different elements of infrastructure are damaged, you know, in different kinds of disasters. So this is the, I have here presented here a select number of countries where we had the assessments: Nepal, Philippines, Fiji, Serbia, Ecuador, and Dominica. You would see that the damages vary between 9 to 25%, and this includes both the damages and losses. So it also depends upon how we classify infrastructure. Sometimes, you know, water and sanitation is actually included in the social services and not in infrastructure. We also now have included community infrastructure, minor infrastructure in the scope of the assessment, and that is not often included in the scope of infrastructure. So it all depends upon how the infrastructure is defined. So damage to infrastructure, the scale is very much linked to the level of development. You know, if you have a higher level of infrastructure, you have more exposure, then of course the scale of damages would be higher. You know, and this has indeed been the case in recent disasters in the U.S. You know, Harvey, you know, the total loss has been $180 billion. So it's more a case of asset accumulation and higher risk exposure. We also need to understand what is it that causes most damages. You know, earthquakes are most destructive, and they are destructive of physical infrastructure. But apart from the damages, there are a lot of losses also. You know, so losses is basically loss of the flow losses, income losses. So if there are infrastructure systems become dysfunctional, we incur a huge amount of flow losses, and that they are also taken into account. Landslides are generally very, very destructive, and you know, they have a very serious impact on infrastructure, but landslides are very localized. So you know, the scale is not very, very high. Windstorm, the flash flooding, and the flying debris, they cause most damages. The windstorms generally have affected ports and airports. And when it comes to floods, it is the length of inundation that really influences the level of damages. So if the water logging continues for a long time, sometimes months, the impact on infrastructure is severe. We have seen some of the airports, Mumbai Airport and Chennai Airport. They were, you know, they had, you know, some amount of, I think, extended floods, and they caused a lot of loss. Another good thing that has happened in the recent past is that we have developed the guidelines for the damage and loss assessment. So as you have seen here, all the sectors, productive, social, and infrastructure losses, we have the guidelines available. So we have water and sanitation, community infrastructure, electricity, transport, and telecommunications. So all the guidelines are available, and we use these guidelines extensively while conducting the PDNAs. So this has been very, very helpful in standardizing the assessment. When it comes to when we conduct the assessment, at that time we estimate the recovery cost, and the recovery cost, is generally based on the total cost of damages, and we use the cost of recovery. we estimate the cost of recovery on the principle of replacement. We really do not take into account the cost of depreciation. So how much it would cost to replace a particular element of infrastructure. And the second thing is this, that we basically take into account the damages, not the losses. So the losses, while we include both the damages and losses for the overall infrastructure assessment, when it comes to the recovery planning, it's only the damages, the cost of damages, that's material and that's relevant. When it comes to the recovery cost, then we generally add 10% over the replacement cost. So that's the markup that we provide on a standard basis. And this 10% addition markup is provided for building back better and making infrastructure resilient. Now, this is where we have the problem. We do not have really the detailed guidelines for recovery planning, and we provide this kind of a cost on an average basis. Just add 10%, and that's it. So it's a kind of formula that we apply across the board. And this is something that needs to be refined. It's a matter of improving our practice of recovery planning, and we have not reached there yet. But in some cases, when we are doing the recovery planning, we have started providing for new infrastructure. Not late. Yeah, we start providing for new infrastructure, roads, telecommunications, energy, in some of those areas where these provisions do not exist, these facilities do not exist, and in that case, they are included in the cost of recovery. So when it comes to implementing infrastructure recovery, it is the government that's really takes the key responsibility. In fact, the infrastructure recovery has never been a very difficult issue, because governments always, all the infrastructure has been owned by the government. Government always consider the functionality of the that is provided by infrastructure for very important for recovery, and the line departments have implemented the recovery program. But the focus has always been on restoring the functionality and not on rebuilding to new standards. It's basically you restore the functions, and the recovery would be limited to that. Over a period of time, now the ambit of recovery has expanded, and the infrastructure planning actually has come into being, and infrastructure is getting integrated with the planned settlements. Number of civic amenities are now being planned along with the housing, cities, and all this has increased the scope of infrastructure recovery. Someone pointed in the morning that infrastructure, different asset classes are owned by different entities. It's the federal government, state government, local government. They all own different types of infrastructure. So there are several jurisdictions, and it's always complex managing these jurisdictions. It's a strong partnership with the state and local governments is very, very important for infrastructure recovery. And here Japan and US actually have a lot to demonstrate. They have set up planning bodies, and they went into the infrastructure planning on a very large scale, and and it has resulted into the improvement of overall infrastructure in these countries. Here in India, the area development authorities in Gujarat, 4 cities were reconstructed. Yesterday there was Dr. P.K. Mishra was making a reference to these 4 cities. In all these 4 cities, we had the government of Gujarat set up the area development authorities, and actually that's a very good practice of developing the urban infrastructure. As far as the infrastructure recovery financing is concerned, again, most of the money comes from the government. Government takes the responsibility. When the IFIs have been a major provider of resources for infrastructure recovery. World Bank has always provided a lot of money, lending operations they have for infrastructure recovery, and that's why this has been a favored sector actually compared to housing and livelihoods. Of late, housing and livelihoods are catching up. But again, as I said, that this is as the exposure is increasing, the losses are mounting. I think we need more diversified services and mechanisms of infrastructure financing. It's very important for private sector to join these efforts, but they can do it only when the government makes it possible to do it on a cost recovery basis. The local governments have issued reconstruction bonds in many developed countries for infrastructure reconstruction, but in developing countries, we are still some distance away. The most important thing, I think the future direction is intergovernmental risk pools, where the governments at different levels come together and set up these pools, both for managing the risks as well as for financing recovery. The standards and regulations, it's important that these standards and regulations are developed. These are actually, they are not available right now. I mean, and this is another area which requires significant attention. It has been discussed extensively in the morning, so I would not like to say a lot about it, but there are few things that are emerging very clearly. One is that it's very important to increase the elevation while you are doing the recovery, because of the climate change, the rise in sea level, increasing elevation. Second, introducing anti-erosion measures, and 3, increasing the distance from the coastal lines. These 3 things are actually are generally the most important mitigation principles that need to be taken into account while recovery planning. Transportation structure should not impede water drainage. That's again a very important principle to observe. And there is a need for greater investment in resilience of power generation, transmission, and distribution. So this is one area where UNDP would like to work with our partners, particularly the World Bank. We want to develop detailed guidelines for recovery planning in the infrastructure. Overall, this is my last slide. Yeah. So a nation's ability to recover critical infrastructure is a reflection of its capacity to respond to a disaster. So it's the most important thing, that the countries should be able to recover the infrastructure as quickly as possible. It is recovery provides a context for investment in infrastructure, new infrastructure, building improved, introducing new standards and regulations, and bringing a new level of development. And it also provides an opportunity to review the approach to infrastructure. I think in course of time, we will see more emphasis on renewable energy and non-carbonized kind of infrastructure. And whenever the governments fail to recover infrastructure, the degradation of infrastructure persists for a long time, and it has a very serious impact on the overall economic efficiency. So here, this is my presentation, but I would like the discussion to go further, and I would like to seek, on behalf of UNDP, a stronger partnership with the government of India to work on some of these issues, setting new standards and regulations, and improving our recovery planning, and setting up some risk pools so that we have a better mechanism for infrastructure recovery financing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Krishna. The OS presentation was very comprehensive about challenges of recovery, and I think my comments on his comprehensive presentations are completely overlapping. It means it's good. We are on the same page. Now I next like to invite, there is no one for UNOPS? So UNOPS? No, okay, so we skip it to the, but I like to invite, maybe you? Yes, please, sir.
Good afternoon, respected chair, co-chair, and dignitaries on the dais, representatives from different countries and organizations, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the organizers of this workshop, National Disaster Management Authority, Government of India, and UNISDR for providing me this opportunity to be here to share the experience of reconstruction and recovery after a devastating earthquake of 2015 in Nepal. To begin with, first I would like to introduce Nepal country. This is Nepal with area of 147,000 square kilometers, situated between China in north and India in remaining 3 directions. Altitude is from 60 meter to 8,848 meter, that is top peak of the world, Mount Everest. We have 75 districts and 7 provinces. Naturally, Nepal is very beautiful, and it is one of the richest countries, maybe one of the richest countries in terms of natural resources and natural beauty. But at the same time, it is hub of the natural disaster. It is very hot spot, we can say. We have all types of natural disasters except tsunami, as we do not have sea. We have flood, landslide, earthquake, epidemics, fire, hailstone, drought, glacier, lake outburst, flood, windstorm, avalanches, thunderbolt. Frequent occurring disaster is landslide and flood. Every year, many people lost their lives in flood. An earthquake is always likely to happen because Nepal is situated in between 2 giant tectonic plates, Indian and Tibetan plates, moving towards each other. So it is in the high risk. Nepal ranks 11th in terms of earthquake, 6th in terms, now it has been come to 4th in terms of climatic hazards, 30th in terms of flood, and Kathmandu is the 21st most vulnerable city of the world. As per the World Bank 2005 report, Nepal is hotspot for natural disaster, as I already said. It is highly vulnerable in terms of climate change also. due to snow-covered Himalayas melting each year. We have institutional arrangement for managing natural disaster. For that, recently we have amended previous Disaster Management Act by Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act 2017. As per this act, we have one Disaster Risk Reduction and Management National Council under the chairmanship of Prime Minister, and that is responsible for formulating policy, managing budget, and coordinating among different stakeholders. Under this council, there is one executive committee. That committee is chaired by Home Minister, and that is responsible for coordination, response, rescue, and relief in case of disaster. And similarly, under the council, there will be one autonomous National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority. We have newly introduced this authority in Nepal. And there are Province Disaster Management Committee in 7 provinces and District Disaster Management Committee in all districts, and also there will be local level disaster management committees in local levels. This is our response mechanism in case of disaster. When disaster occurs, situation analysis is done by local level disaster management committee, district level disaster management committee for search, rescue, immediate relief. And then it reports to PDMC, that is Province Disaster Management Committee, that reports to Disaster Risk Reduction and Management National Council. Up from the meeting of National Council, Government of Nepal then declares disaster with area and time, and then international appeal is made. UN Resident Humanitarian Coordinator, UNDP, USAR teams, they help to mobilize clusters. Clusters are activated, INGOs and other government line agencies are mobilized to rescue and recovery. There are so many acts, regulations, legal systems to respond disaster. With this, now I would like to go for overview of 2015 earthquake. On 25th April of 2015, at the midday, 11:56, a huge devastating earthquake of magnitude 7.8 Richter scale occurred very near to Kathmandu, some 200 kilometer western side of Kathmandu, that is Gorkha. So this earthquake is also known as Gorkha earthquake. And after that, more than 400 aftershocks we faced. And among these aftershocks, one was major 17 days after the first occurrence of the earthquake, that is on May 12th of 2015. And epicenter of that was near Mount Everest, Dolakha district, which additionally damaged a lot of property and huge casualties was done from that second aftershock. As a result of the earthquake, nearly 9,000 people lost their life and more than 22,000 people were injured. Assessment showed that at least 500,000 private houses and nearly 2,656 government buildings were destroyed. In addition to that, more than 257 private houses and 3,600 government buildings were partially damaged. 19,000 classrooms were destroyed and 11,000 were damaged. The earthquake affected manufacturing, production, and trade in agriculture, as well as tourism and other areas of the service sector, thereby weakening the national economy. It was estimated that the lives of 8 million people, which is nearly 1/3 of the total population of the country, have been impacted by that earthquake. 31 of the country's 75 districts have been affected, out of which 14 were declared crisis hit for the purpose of prioritizing rescue and relief operations. Another 17 neighboring districts were partially affected. As recovery advisor of UNDP already pointed out in his presentation, the post-disaster need assessment showed that there was loss of nearly 7 million US dollar from that earthquake. These are some photographs. And after earthquake, now it has already been 2.5 years, 30 months after the quake, we have started our reconstruction. For launching a large-scale recovery program following a major disaster needs commitment of financial and human resources, concerted multi-pronged effort to address short-term requirements, develop a policy and institutional framework, design a financing strategy, and put implementation arrangements in place. So with the objective to meet these needs, National Reconstruction Authority was formed, established in late 2015. Immediately after the establishment of National Reconstruction Authority, survey of the damaged property was done, and several policies and guidelines were made. Among these, the Reconstruction and Rehabilitation Policy 2016 was the major one. That is the policy instrument for steering reconstruction and rehabilitation. These policies and guidelines clarify the roles and responsibilities of different institutions working on reconstruction and rehabilitation. By now, Government of Nepal has approved several guidelines and standards to facilitate the reconstruction works. These guidelines I have mentioned in slide, but due to time limitation, I am skipping this. And preparation of post-disaster recovery framework was done under the leadership of National Reconstruction Authority in consultation with key stakeholders to provide a systematic, structured, and prioritized framework for implementing recovery that lays out the strategic recovery objectives and summarizes in an integrated manner the policy decisions, institutional arrangements, financing and financial management strategies, as well as implementation and monitoring system. How much progress has been made now, after 30 months? In short, not much as per expectation. In the quake's aftermath, Nepal immediately became embroiled in political squabbles. To date, as of now, Nepal has managed to rebuild just over 63,000 private homes out of 5,000 damaged. But time was taken to form National Reconstruction Authority and develop guidelines, standards, and recruiting engineers and others. So once everything are now in place, so it won't take more time for remaining buildings to be completed, we hope. Out of 750 heritage structures damaged, including palaces, temples, and Buddhist shrines, about 90 are now being reconstructed. 90 out of 750 have been reconstructed. The government is committed to provide all the affected population in the crisis hit area who wish to rebuild their house on their own will get a relief assistance of NPR 300,000 in 3 installments based on the progress of the work, plus a concessional loan up to NPR 2.5 million in Kathmandu Valley and 1.5 million outside the valley at just 2% interest rate to facilitate reconstruction. The government has prepared and has put into effect the Integrated Action Plan for Post-Earthquake Response and Recovery 2072. It has altogether 40 actions to be completed, and some of them are constructing temporary emergency shelters, providing children who have lost their guardians and parents in the earthquake and those who are rendered homeless with shelters and free education, making necessary arrangement for providing the affected farmers with free of cost seeds and subsidized for fertilizers, making a review of the National Building Code 2060. This is for resilient infrastructure. We have our own National Building Code, and immediately after earthquake, based on the lessons of that earthquake, we have started revision of that code. In that process, we have total 23 volumes of National Building Code, and out of 23 volumes, we have completed 4 volumes, and one is under the progress of revision, under the assistance of Asian Development Bank under this EEAP project, Earthquake Emergency Assistance Project. Undertaking a review of the land use policy, dismantling of the cracked structure that pose danger. Also dismantling the structures at the cost of the owners who built the houses by violating the building codes. We have started that mercilessly because we have learned many lessons from that earthquake. Now, this is the status of reconstruction of private houses. I've mentioned in slide, but I'm skipping this. We could not have completed as per our expectation that I already mentioned. Status of reconstruction of public buildings, out of total 483 buildings, now we have completed 177 buildings only. And other activities apart from reconstruction, what we have done is extensive mason training and trainings to the engineers for implementation of National Building Code all over the country. My department, Department of Urban Development and Building Construction, where I work under the Ministry of Urban Development, is responsible for implementing National Building Code. Before getting building construction permit from local bodies, we have to certify that design is as per the requirement of National Building Code. That means the proposed design has complied the requirement of National Building Code. Only then local bodies, they approve the drawings. We have made several community housing and we have issued 31 standard type design, earthquake resistant, multi-hazard resistance building design. Yeah, I'm going to complete. This is probably last slide. And we have started revision of building code. 29 integrated settlements have been designed. Earthquake Memorial Park in Gorkha is under construction. Engineering design of 140 settlement for transferring the settlement is being done. Conclusion, despite long political transition, difficult terrain, and inadequate resources, Nepal is struggling hard to rebuild the nation damaged from the recent earthquake. In this connection, we have received substantial and appreciable support from our friend countries and multinational development partners in rescue, relief, recovery, and reconstruction, and we hope continued support in future also. These are some photographs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think even though I would also want to congratulate you for the launching of many programs and frameworks. Even though your progress, you said it might be slower than expected, but I think you're making a steady progress. It's been just 2 years or so, so congratulations. Then I'd like to invite Mr. Deepak Singh from World Bank, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I think this workshop has been quite interesting, quite comprehensive and exhaustive as well. And probably mine is the last presentation, so I promise you one thing, that I'll not bore you for long. My presentation is in 2 parts. I have a small presentation, and then I have a small video film which I'll play, which basically dwells into the the issues that we'll see come in the presentation. We have discussed quite a lot about the public infrastructure. It's true that in majority of the disasters, the public infrastructure takes a big hit, and it's a Herculean task to rebuild and reconstruct. However, as Krishna Vatsa was also saying, there is this one sector which is private, and this is, I'm talking about housing. This is private asset. Therefore, there is also at times hesitation by public agencies to get involved in the rebuilding, reconstruction of the housing sector. However, I think as Krishna ji also said, that over a period of time we have seen shift in the approach of public agency, and there is more and more willingness to get associated with the housing. And depending on the disaster that we are talking about, depending upon the area, basically the economic background of that area we are talking about, the housing could be a major challenge. In some of the disasters, for example in India, either it was tsunami or some of the cyclones in Orissa, the major chunk of the damage that takes place is that to the housing, and therefore housing becomes very important sector for revival of people's life, because people's livelihood are also associated with their housing. So with this small background, I'll start. Now, bank has been involved in India in several reconstruction recovery projects post-disaster, and I'll go over few of them. There, before 2004, also bank was involved in Latur and in Gujarat, most notably on the housing reconstruction. But of the recent past, starting from 2004 tsunami, then in 2008 the Bihar floods, and in 2013 two events, Odisha and Uttarakhand, Odisha cyclone and Uttarakhand floods. So two more events which bank was involved post 2033, the cyclone Hudhud in AP and the floods in Sri Lanka, Jammu and Kashmir. A bank is not involved in the housing sector, so I'm not covering that. This is small statistics in terms of the numbers, what is being tackled in these projects. Now, there are different approaches which even bank has experimented in different interventions in different geographies. However, in past few years, the experience is, and I think more and more people are now willing to accept that owner-driven housing is the solution, and this is one model which works very well in the post-disaster housing reconstruction. However, there are also different derivatives of this model, and this can also be contextualized and customized for different situations. But largely owner-driven model is what has worked. Again, I mean, different partners, different actors have different way of terming it. UN terms it as build back better. Somebody comes with build back smarter. Somebody says build back stronger. But I think what is at the back of mind is that the vulnerability has to reduce, or the risk has to reduce, and therefore whenever we are reconstruction, the target is that we have to ensure that the same risk is not brought back, and that the risk reduces, and that's how the concept of build back better, smarter, stronger. We do have cases wherein houses are constructed in situ. They have a particular set of challenge. There are also relocations that happens in these post-disaster situations, because either the people did not have title over the land where they were living, or the land or the piece of land that they were living is so much more vulnerable that we cannot reconstruct a house at the same location. Civic amenities and toilets, the experience is that many times there is a focus on, and I think the toilet thing is also quite a powerful story, especially in certain regions of India where there is lack of sanitation and people were not, people did not have access to toilets in the regular houses. So when you do the reconstruction and recovery, then you have to bring those elements also into the picture. How to provide the better civic amenities, how to also get them access to the toilets and those kind of things. Insurance is one thing which the bank has been kind of insisting on the recovery projects. Private assets, let's get them insured. Thankfully, there are long-term insurance policies available for housing. So at one premium, you can insure your house against some kind of 10 hazards for 10 years. And over a period, there is also a realization that there could be events happening during the construction, and therefore we also introduced the concept of houses getting insured for the duration of the construction also. Inclusiveness, gender aspects are very important, and we'll get into how we do that. What is also realized and practiced is that while reconstructing, and there are instances like reconstruction happens in Bihar, in Kosi area. It was necessitated because of the floods in that area, but that area is also hugely vulnerable to earthquakes. And therefore, when we are rebuilding houses in those areas, it's not only the flood, it's also the earthquake that is an imminent threat, and therefore multi-hazard resistant housing aspects have to be brought in. The owner-driven housing also brings in a lot of challenges. People are building their own houses, but that's not their profession. They don't have that experience of building their own houses. And therefore, an additional help, outside help is certainly required, which we try to bring in terms of a third-party agency, which could be a part of the government, as we did in some projects in Bihar, or it could be a third-party agency like a NGO which brings in a social and technical support to the beneficiaries. On the inclusiveness, general focus has been on the gender and how the reconstruction can, or the reconstructed houses can be in the name of the joint owner, or the bank accounts that are opened for providing the tranches. Those could be in joint names, or sometimes only in the name of women. So that is one aspect. Holistic approach, it's not only housing, bring in all other aspects, habitation planning, linkage with other government schemes, and financial incentives. This is again experience derived over several projects. So not only we give money to people in tranches after verification of each and every stage, there's also a question of if you are building your house at the same location, then where are you living in that duration? So either provide rental or provide transit housing. Giving some incentives. There are people who construct and complete their housing in a defined time. There are people who will not construct their house and they'll overshoot the target timing, and therefore people who construct in time, they get some incentive. Once you have constructed your houses, how you are relocating to that houses. So there is assistance required in terms of moving your luggage, in terms of moving your belongings. So those kind of elements are brought in. This I think was also dwelled earlier, and probably also very important from the perspective of Nepal. Many times people don't wait, because these kind of structured programs take time to come. There is a process, there is a damage assessment, then the government will have access to finances, and then those finances have to be operationalized. It comes with some process, procedures, and things like that. So there is a delay. But people start rebuilding their houses. And therefore, they may be joining these programs at a certain stage of this program, and therefore, they may or may not be compliant. The houses may or may not be compliant to all the parameters that the program defines, and therefore, there is an aspect which we should bring in is of the flexibility in terms of retrofitting approach. So some of the houses which have already gone ahead to a certain extent can be retrofitted to bring in the aspects of resilience. Readiness for mid-course correction, which is again the approach related to retrofitting what we found in Uttarakhand, because a lot of houses started to come in, but they were not following certain aspects, so we had to bring in a retrofitting approach there. Insurance, as I said, not only during the for the constructed houses, but also for the houses under construction. I think overall what we have seen that housing programs are a very good opportunity to bring in the resilience, and also in public utilities, because you can plan those public utilities, how the roads have to come, how the drainage system has to be done, how the sanitation system has to be done, and that can be planned once we are doing a reconstruction of the house, especially if it is being done in a relocation area. But it also provides a lot of opportunity if it is being done in situ. There is also opportunity that these programs present to link to various other things. We can also link it to the solar energy program, which has been done in some of our projects. We can also link it to the total sanitation campaign, which at one point of time was going on in India. It still goes on, to draw matching funds from there, and so on. I mean, there are a lot of other government schemes that can be used. Behavior changes can be brought in during this reconstruction phase in communities. I mean, I need not get into all the things, so I'll try to be a little more faster. Lessons learned for mainstreaming. I think before we go with this, I'll put the film and see if that works. And I'll put the last slide after this again. Can we have the sound, please?
Natural disasters cause loss of life and render thousands of people homeless. The World Bank has been assisting post-disaster housing reconstruction in India since the 1990s. Through its recent projects, the bank's supported housing programs have included some key elements such as disaster-resilient construction, owner-driven processes, involvement of a third-party social technical support agency, use of traditional techniques and material, building of local capacities, women empowerment, and promotion of sustainable alternatives. Tamil Nadu government extended its tsunami reconstruction project to provide safe housing to coastal communities living in vulnerable houses.
The strength of the houses was one aspect, I think, which we took care. This, I'm sure, would have created a very good model for many of the coastal communities throughout the world, particularly the emerging economies.
After the Kosi floods of 2008, Government of Bihar initiated an owner-driven reconstruction program where life-size models were built to help people choose house design. Improved disaster-resilient features were incorporated into the local design.
They are getting the entire money which is due to them. It's on account of this factor that people are also adding to that money and making slightly bigger houses.
Government of Uttarakhand, after the flash floods in 2013, launched a housing reconstruction program to build back better.
There was a strong demand from the people that they would like to construct their own houses. And it was decided that people will construct their own houses and only certain basic minimum conditions will be attached from the state government and World Bank sides.
जो ODCH के तहत जितने भी भवन निर्माण हुए हैं, अधिकतर टॉयलेट और किचन को संयुक्त परिवेश उसके साथ ही अटैच करके बनाया गया है.
After the 2013 cyclone Phylon, Government of Odisha initiated the reconstruction of damaged and kacha houses. Some constructions were in situ and some in new safer locations.
Gram Vikas's responsibilities included mobilizing the communities, preparing contour and habitation plans, also to enable and empower them to make owner-driven housing a success.
To ensure resilient construction in these projects, financial assistance was released in tranches after stage-wise verification of construction progress by the project team. The houses were insured for multiple disasters for 10 years. Insurance now extends to houses under construction. Mason trainings were conducted to ensure resilient house construction. Use of local manpower and material enhanced livelihood opportunities for the communities. To empower women, emphasis was laid on opening of joint bank accounts and registering land in the name of women. Toilets were mandated as part of the houses. Grievance redressal mechanism was set up. In due course of time, people have customized their homes and added features. They have built these houses with hopes for a resilient future.
அது இல்லாத தானா புயல் வந்தப்ப அந்த ஓலை வீடு இருந்தாக்க எத்தனை பேர் தான் செத்து இருப்பாங்க அந்த மாதிரி புயலை பார்த்தே இருக்க முடியாது
मेरे जैसी जो महिला
Just last slide, I mean, which we want to indicate as how some of these lessons can be now mainstreamed into some of the government programs, and there are large government programs which are trying to construct houses for everybody in India, and we will have to ensure that it doesn't end up increasing the risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and congratulations for the progress of the project. The house owner-driven project is always complicated, but you are managing it very well. Thank you, congratulations. Then I would like to invite two speakers from the floor. One is our colleague from Myanmar, and the next is our speakers from Nepal. No? It's fine, okay. I'd just like to invite colleagues from Myanmar. Could you please raise your hands if you are there? Colleagues from Myanmar? A lady? Okay, please.
distinguished delegate, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all. I would like to introduce myself. I am from the participant on Myanmar. Today I present the disaster reduction in the Myanmar. Myanmar is the second largest country in the Asia with Asia in the neighboring country India, Bangladesh, China, and Laos. And as you know, Myanmar is prone to the almost all types of the hazards such as earthquake, tsunami, flood, landslide, cyclone, storm wind, lightning, soil erosion, fire, forest fire, drought, industrial, and technological hazards. The existing risk can increase manifold due to the climate change and skill development. This is the area-wise of the natural hazards in Myanmar. Damage due to the hazards during 2004 to the 2040 fiscal year, damage other landslide, bank erosion and conflict and communal conflict and earthquake. In Myanmar, disaster management law was ratified by the national government on the 31st June 2030, and disaster management rule prescribed by the Ministry of Social Welfare, Relief and Resettlement on the 7th April 2015. In the National Disaster Management Committee and National Disaster Management Committee under the chair of the Vice President, who is the apex body of the disaster risk management, DRM, 12 work committee related from the suspect area of the disaster risk management and advisory committee has been set up under the Natural Disaster Management Committee. This is the national instrument for the disaster management. There are 12 working committees. This is the mechanical of the disaster response in the Myanmar. This is the disaster cycle, the role of the Relief and Resettlement Department. The Relief and Resettlement Department function is for the disaster management cycle, and there are four: preparedness, response, and recovery, and mitigation and prevention. This is the epidemic water in the Myanmar. And I think this first called such as storm wind, and double heavy rainfall and thunderstorm, hailstorm, and simultaneous because of the change of the early rainy season on the later rainy season. This is the from across the Myanmar coast during the period 1887 to the 2007. In the Myanmar, 99.7% of river run inside from the Myanmar. In our country, roughly consists of the 4 sub-basins in the around the Myanmar. This is the strong nuggets from the period 12 April 4 May 2008. In our country, it also flows surf and wide speed of the flow and landslide, triggered by the torrential rain resulting from the 16 July 2005 in the northern part of the Myanmar, effect of the cyclone combined landfall in the Bangladesh. 12 states and the region of the Myanmar were affected in the flood. This is the flood and landslide in the Myanmar in the 2015. This is the recovery mechanism of the Myanmar. In the implementing of the recovery, coordination, the early recovery, needs assessment, strategic planning, monitoring and evaluation and programming. It is the recovery intervention providing agriculture investment to rebuilding new houses for the relocated population, reconstruction damage and destroyed road and bridge, restoring waste infrastructure, reinforcing dam and attack, rebuilding school, rural health center of the office building, maintaining the river bank and river system, exploit all the 12 new buildings in the suffer from and the more accessible place. And to prepare for recovery, develop strategy and plan for the early needs assessment, recovery planning and the resource or the mobilization, creating the social awareness, inclusive of the vulnerable, marginal and the discriminated groups. Certainly, the capacity of the local community in terms of the recovery and disaster risk reduction, rebuilding, restoring, reinforcing a national land and local system for the recovery, implementation, reviewing and developing essential policies. First, in the establishment system with clear rule and responsibility that the reinforce and restoration and recovery in the development process. Ensuring to use all the promised practices so that the mechanism to the abroad to the do no harm across the maximum strategy through the effective coordination. The typhoon and flood disaster management mechanism, preparedness, response, and recovery. In the Myanmar, in inclusion, I would like to state that the Myanmar is making best effort to effectively implement disaster management programming within our means, with the objective to mitigate loss of the life and property and natural resources of the nation in case of disaster. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For my apology, I forgot to invite one more speaker. She is not present here, but she will make her presentation through video. So could you please put on the video for her speech? Can we hear her voice from?
Hello, my name is Tina Komes and I'm very happy to talk to you, albeit remotely, about resilience in the disaster response and recovery. As you can see there in my contact details, I'm working at the Technical University of Delft in the Netherlands, and I'm an associate professor here. My work is dedicated to disaster response and recovery, and today I'm going to take you first through some work on critical infrastructure resilience before going into the more behavioral implication and decision support during the response. Now, why are we considering the response phase at all? I've shown you here a recent graphic from the World Economic Forum that shows you trends that you've undoubtedly discussed, such as climate change, migration, political instability, and associated risks that can be more and more severe weather events, that can be political unrest and instability, that can be migration, and so forth. So you see that these big trends are linked to individual small-scale breakups. And the infrastructures that you are developing need both be able to accommodate for these trends and longer-term changes, as well as take into account and support the response to these shock events and crises. Now, what are the key characteristics of resilience in the disaster response phase. First of all, you have to deal with some of the problems that are probably common to you from the planning phase, such as deep uncertainty and the lack of predictability of what is going to happen. You have complexity of interconnected critical infrastructures, as well as socio-technical systems where behavior plays an important role, and you do have the volatility of open and dynamic societies, for sure characteristic for India. In addition, in the response phase, there is time pressure. So while you are responding to an emergency, a shock or a disaster, you have to also think about what the best way to respond is. You have to collect data, you have to come up with models, and you see that there is a lot of things that will be happening in common, and time is of the essence there. At the same time, information is evolving about what actually is going on, and driven by this change of information that decision makers have, you will adapt your priorities, it will change your preferences, but on the longer term, specific disasters can also lead to a shift of values and norms. And finally, there are cascading effects. That means that a shock event is not constrained to a specific infrastructure, but will cascade to other failures. Here's an example from the energy domain, where we investigated the implications of disruptions of energy supplies on other critical infrastructures. And basically what you can see here is that power blackouts have severe consequences, for instance, for sectors like transportation, ICT and finances, which ultimately can lead to shortages of food, water or medical supplies. And then the disruptions in the critical infrastructures can then also have consequences for the wider socio-economic system. An application for that in the context of Hurricane Sandy that we were developing is looking at the vulnerability of specific industries to power blackouts. And this is a comparative analysis of different industrial sectors in the response to Sandy, and also a geographical breakdown which is designed to help decision makers understand where they have to prioritize scarce resources, although the industry itself may not be hit directly by an incident. Similar analyses have also been performed for different industrial sectors and their dependence on transportation and ICT, and you can really see here that different sectors will have very different vulnerabilities. So depending on what shocks you expect as primary event, you have to adapt your response. Now to the second part. This has been relatively theoretical work and a lot of modeling. Now I've also been doing a lot of field research, particularly in the response to disasters, to understand a lot of the behavioral issues that occur in decision making. So this is a short overview on the role of decision, information and systems in the response. Now I've said already that time is of the essence in a disaster and emergency, and one of the huge problems is that problem formulation and decision making occur basically at the same time. You can see here a couple of quotes. And basically what I would like to stress is that decision making is not always rational, that coordination can be very fragmented and localized, and that basically most decision making, particularly in a stressful situation, is not following an optimization, but is largely a simplification and then satisfying of dominating strategies. So this is for how one decision maker behaves. Now, what is also interesting and getting more and more complex in any type of disaster, and particularly if you're talking about humanitarian response, it is not easy anymore to define the decision maker. And what I would like to show you with this slide is largely how diverse the actors that we are talking about are. So different actors involved range, of course, from state authorities, critical infrastructure providers and industry, the media, civil sector, the military, up to NGOs. So if we develop models that are also covering the response and recovery phase, we have to take into account also the complexity of the environment in which we are working. And I'm going to close this presentation basically with arguing that we have to take into account a double interdependence. Critical infrastructures are interconnected, as you've seen for the energy sector, so we need to look not only at one infrastructure, but at their interdependence. At the same time, decision makers in the response or recovery to a disaster have to be able to work with this information and make their decision. So eventually we need models that consider the complexities of these socio-technical systems and develop a notion of resilience that is baked into the engineering systems, as well as allows flexibility and adaptation in decision making. Again, I'm very sorry that I couldn't be with you during this workshop, but I would be very happy to follow up. Please do contact me via email or in any other ways, and I'll be happy to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tina. We wanted to see you in person. Anyways, thank you for your time, and sorry we're a little bit running late, but I would really like to take several questions. Maybe I just only limit to after? Or do you? Okay. Sorry, we like to take just only 3 questions. Please, could you please raise your hands? Then I will ask, invite you in the, also one lady and then gentleman there, and then I saw there's 3. Okay, please start from the ladies.
Thank you so much for the presentations. I have 2 questions. One is for Deepak and one largely for the entire panel. I think for Deepak, it was really interesting to see your work on housing reconstruction all across the country, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about your experience of working in the urban areas versus rural areas, and how housing reconstruction is, the challenges in the urban are slightly different, and especially aligning with the existing centrally sponsored schemes on housing that you worked with. And for the rest of the panel, I think it's almost like an inquiry that I have. I'm not sure if there's a real answer for this, but often disasters skew an existing sort of dynamic in a certain context, you know, like political dynamics exist in a certain context, and disasters skew that dynamic, especially between the poor and the vulnerable, and sometimes often the public sector being on the other side. And then the aid and the funding that comes in also skews it further in one direction. And we've seen that, you know, there is, in the process of recovery, there is a differential position that's taken for large-scale infrastructure like airports, and other railways and other infrastructure versus housing and you know, affordable housing, and often people are relocated in that process as a solution. So my question was, how can the poor and the vulnerable, how can there be a safety net policy for the poor and vulnerable in that context of recovery?
Okay, thank you very much. And the next question, so I saw gentleman somewhere in the middle. Can you, who raised hands for the question? No, you, sorry. Yeah.
So Chair, very good evening, and respected panelists and seniors and juniors out here. I'm Pradeep. I represent Business Continuity Institute. I am an alumni of Netarhat. My senior is NDRF chief here, and my younger brother is here as the chief, one of the chief organizers. I'm from IBM. The background work which I've seen last 1.5 days, amazing. I'm really impressed. Mr. Vyas from Bihar, he talked about the capacity. One distinguished guest from Japan, he talked about the business continuity. In the recovery, we have talked about how to reconstruct. Perhaps at the end of that, perhaps we are to talk about how to continue the business, how the poor do not lose their livelihood, and if we have to continue the business, the security guards and the facilities anywhere are the poor people whose houses are impacted. So we have to think of business continuity. The suggestion. My suggestion is, can we catch them young? This will perhaps inculcate a sense of sustenance right from the beginning. And why do I say that? Perhaps Sendai gives us 12 more years. A child who is 6 years old will be passing his 12th or her 12th after 12 years. A person who is in class 6th when the civics study starts, perhaps will be passing out of architecture and civil engineering and whatnot. So that will be inculcated into them. So they will be then ensure that regulations are actually embedded in the implementation, the major challenges. So the panelists can think about it and see where we are taking our disaster resilience infrastructure into ensuring the business. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last question from the back. Thanks, please.
I am Anil Gupta. I am from National Institute of Disaster Management of India. I have two reflections and one concern. We have worked out a case study-based training package jointly with the United Nations University Institute of Environment and Human Security. There we had studied the risk of natural disasters concerning hydro power sectors in India. Number two is we had an opportunity to witness the strategic environmental assessment process before starting the redevelopment in the North Province of Sri Lanka. And these two examples provide a kind of insight that when we talk of resilient infrastructure, then resilient infrastructure is a part of the broad developmental setting. That is important. And particularly when we look in the context of the geographical planning, or more particularly in a post-conflict situation, then how do we see the role of strategic environmental assessment or geographical planning, which I find that is kind of a more fundamental for thinking about resilient infrastructure. So this I want some reflection.
Thank you very much. Excellent point. Anybody would like to speakers respond to the questions?
I would like to respond to the suggestions that you made. No, in India, there have been two milestone infrastructure projects. One was, it was the Konkan Railways project. It was the first time India started investing big in infrastructure. And the second was the Mumbai-Pune Expressway. Again, the first expressway in India. So both of them, very, very important projects. Both the projects, after they were completed and they were operational, they had a number of mishaps, number of disasters, and a lot of people lost their lives, and they had a lot of dysfunctionality, I think the breakdowns, And all of that has happened because I think the environment assessment was not really conducted. Both the infrastructure projects actually negotiated a very fragile ecosystem. And so many landslides happened, so many floodings happened, and it caused a huge amount of damage. So I think, these two projects actually, now I think over a period of time, a number of steps have been taken to improve the resilience of these two major systems. And I think the number of accidents, number of disasters has come down. But if some of these assessments were conducted right in the beginning and mitigation measures were included, I think those disasters could have been avoided. So, and I would suggest that we should develop a case study around these two projects. They would be a great teaching material or an instruction material for future infrastructure planning. So it's extremely important that we conduct such assessments before we undertake major environmental projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then Deepak, maybe you can answer to the first question from the lady.
No, I think if you're trying to point out that, the challenges in the urban housing versus rural housing are different, and I think that's very correct. While rural, I mean, there is substantial experience as far as I can say in bank in India on the rural housing in post-disaster reconstruction project. There is also experience of post-disaster reconstruction housing in urban areas, primarily in during the post-tsunami in Tamil Nadu and also in Pondicherry. There are some factors which separate the two, and I'll just dwell on one or two very important ones. The political economy in urban areas is extremely different, and also I think is far more challenging and complex to deal with, and therefore there is a added complexity in urban housing. The second I think is the cost of reconstruction, and that includes cost of land, actual cost of construction, cost of providing services. All this is also not only very different, but it's also much on the higher side, and therefore public agencies' ability to bear those costs in spite of the assistance from financial sources is not easy. The third thing is that the work and residential location linkages are very, very strong in urban areas, and therefore relocation is that much more challenging. The reasons for relocations, as I said, could be many. One is that people do not have access to the actually land where they were living, and for public agencies it becomes very difficult to provide that land in urban areas, and if you find alternate areas, it could be different location, and there are always it is very challenging to move people from one location to another location in urban area. So yeah, these are some of the additional challenges that you face in urban areas.
Thank you. And for response for the second question,
Yeah.
please.
I would say that the world of recovery has been full of contestation, a lot of internal struggles, and people outside do not know, how difficult it has been to negotiate some of the pressures within the government. See, as I mentioned, infrastructure was always, they had significant government ownership. Second, that the departments which owned that infrastructure, they were always influential within the government, and they always could command a lot of support and influence. So and third, that infrastructure projects, recovery projects, they carried big money and also big opportunities for corruption. So infrastructure for recovery was always favored over say housing recovery or livelihoods recovery, and it has been a lot of a struggle for the for livelihoods and housing to come up on the agenda of recovery. A lot of public pressure, and I think the practitioners also applied a lot of pressure, and I think there has been a big change within the international financial institutions, which have been a great supporter of the recovery projects. So a lot of these dynamics have taken place during the last 2 decades, and that's why the complexion and the proportion of the recovery project has undergone significant change. So, and it's still a work in progress, and we will see more balance to come in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I also like to highlight to the lady's question that the inclusive approach of recovery and reconstruction is indispensable to invite all the relevant people, poor and vulnerable or disabled, into the process of reconstruction so that their future can be built back better. So sorry for my very time management is not so good, but I would like to invite Lieutenant Sharma, sir, for your remark. I'm very sorry to ask you to keep it relatively briefly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Kamal Kishore, for giving me these 5 minutes to speak. I just came in to attend, but then I was told that, okay, should I want, I can also present something to you. Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, why am I here is that, okay, in India, the defense infrastructure is made and maintained by us. That is the Corps of Engineers of the Indian Army, and I'm the Engineer-in-Chief, so I thought it will be of some relevance to me to hear in as to what you all are talking about, one. Second is, if the disasters happen, one of the responders from within the country's forces also remain to be the Corps of Engineers. So I have some personal experiences of dealing with the recent troubles that we've had, recent disasters we've had, including what happened in Uttarakhand, including what happened in Sikkim, and I've had a personal experience of going through the earthquake when it happened in Bhuj, the sad incident of Bhuj. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to take too much time, but I presuppose the condition that if we follow, after all, we now really, even within our country with the coming in of the NDMA, we have now gone quite forward in planning our infrastructure in a way that the infrastructure should be resilient and it should be, I would say, disaster-proof to the extent possible. But honestly speaking, can we guarantee that? Can we guarantee all our cities are safe? Can we really predict in a manner that, okay, the disaster will not strike here and it will only strike there? No, we know that there are so many imponderables. Should it happen that disaster strikes a city or a suburban area or a rural area, so I'm going to share with 2 minutes, for 2 minutes with you that post an event, what are the peculiar circumstances which operate in that area? First is, please remember that you're trying to reconstruct and rehabilitate and rebuild a city which has suffered. It is different rebuilding a city from scratch, rebuilding a city where the citizens have suffered. Some of them are no more, people have lost their kith and kin in the families, they are shell-shocked to begin with. My second point is, you're dealing with an administration which is paralyzed at that point of time. So you got to bring in people from outside to do that administration. I've seen an experience in Bhuj when we landed there. The airport that we landed there, Bhuj, was without light because it had itself suffered the damage. The people who were operating the airfield, the Air Force people, they had suffered because the buildings, not the military buildings, that the civil buildings that they were living in had collapsed. They had lost their families. You went to the civil administration, the DM, the district magistrate of the state was actually bewildered as to which way to look because the poor man had suffered himself. We went to the hospital had crumbled. What to talk of treating the casualties, there were casualties inside and now this is, I'm just trying to paint a situation. This is the kind of a situation that you begin with. So first 72 hours when we are launching the rescue, the relief, the initial restoration, it's very, very difficult. But after about 3 days, some kind of semblance of order descends. And that's the time that we need to restore. And my way of looking is what to restore early. I think it is these services. Water supply, the electricity, the communication. Today's time, everybody wants a communication. Hospital services. And then the surface communication, be the road, rail, or the airport. Very, very, as soon as you can. And there is no choice but to restore them. Rebuilding will take its own time. And somebody has very correctly mentioned in your brochure here today that there's a conflict here. There's a conflict between the people who are at the restoration work and the people who are going to bring in the rebuilding part of it. That, okay, should we immediately go ahead and do some kind of a restoration? Or shall we wait for a while and bring in some kind of permanent measures into it? Well, this conflict will remain for the people to deal with. However, when I look at the buildings, we've had an experience of Ahmedabad and Bhuj. Ladies and gentlemen, irrespective of however good the infrastructure may be, the building codes being what they are, there will be 3 kinds of buildings that you're going to likely to meet with, or 3 kinds of infrastructure. One, which is relatively safer and stable, where you don't need to fix it. The second is where you're not very sure. You need to assess it for the damage assessment. And third is the worst category, which is precariously hanging, can cause collateral damage, and that is something you need to address, and I would like to share it with you. It's easy to say that, okay, we are prepared and everything else, but when we were to do the implosion, that is okay in Ahmedabad city, when we were to bring down certain buildings, how to bring it? If you physically bring it down, it's going to take months and months. If you demolish it, it's going to cause collateral damage. So we thought, okay, we will use a technique called the implosion technique. And that point of time, ladies and gentlemen, believe you me, there was one gentleman, Mr. Sarvate, a mining engineer located in Itarsi, who had this technique with him. We being the army people, we were partially trained by him, and then of course we started the same work in Bhuj. So even to clear the debris is a task. And if you don't clear the debris, firstly, it is dangerous. Two, it is causing hygiene conditions. And that's my next point. Ladies and gentlemen, 3 days, 10 days later, the cities start, if I can use the wrong word, rotting, smelling. You have to take care of the hygiene and sanitation, which becomes the top priority. Otherwise, there are going to be other issues. And somebody's already correctly brought it out, that there has to be some kind of a temporary relocation, whether people agree with that or not. So you're going to try and build up a city where people are still working in the city, people are still living inside the city. You have to convince them to temporarily relocate themselves. For temporary relocation, you have to have those hutments and the camp kind of a things. Who will provide services there? And those camps which come up in the vicinity of these cities will probably never get lifted. So all these are the challenges which remain. I thought I must share with you. So this is, and somebody said, okay, what to do, although it is not my subject here, but I look at this way, that maybe it's not a correct thing to do, but then some can look at Vizag as an example. They saw this as an opportunity. Go to Vizag now, see that there is a new Vizag coming up. They took this as an opportunity to take down the buildings which are bad. And a mention is being made here. I would also like to repeat that okay, as far as the high value critical infrastructure is concerned, including the industry, I think in a country like ours, there is no other option but the government has to chip in. Government only can restore it, mega projects. As far as the public utilities are concerned, maybe the PPP model will work. And as far as the housing sector is concerned, I think it is better that we leave it on a government-aided project. Self-help, government-aided, that model will work. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will finish. I thought I will just share my experiences and my views on the subject. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. And I want to invite our co-chair for wrapping up this session, please.
See, we have already overshot our time, so I'll be very brief. One is that it is said that disasters open a window of opportunity for addressing a range of issues, from building better houses, improving the building stock, for empowering people, for providing sustainable livelihood, and also for building better infrastructure. But this has by and large remained a normative discourse. Only a very few reconstruction programs have been able to build back better and set a new normal. Some of the issues have already been discussed here. One is reconstruction process itself is a conflicting process. People want to go back to the pre-disaster level of existence immediately, and planners and governments have a better city in the mind. They want to build back better. We want to build back better, and people say better build back. There is a conflict. And reconstruction is a long-drawn process. It is really one of the least understood aspects of disaster management. It takes 10 years minimum. So politicians may say, announce that we will rebuild in 3 months and 6 months. We have seen this in India many times, but it takes anywhere from 8 to 10 years. So it is a long-drawn process. The other thing is, we discussed a lot about owner-driven reconstruction. Gujarat reconstruction program was successful not only because we advocated owner-driven reconstruction program, but we provided a basket of options to the people. People were allowed to choose owner-driven reconstruction program. If they did not have the capacity, they were allowed to choose NGO-driven reconstruction program. I conducted a study of 500 households in the affected areas of Kutch. I found that poor people, where the number of people in the household is only a few, single mothers, widows, all these people preferred NGO-driven reconstruction. So one size fits all will not succeed. So we have to give a basket of options to the people. The third is, owner-driven reconstruction is good in the rural areas. What about urban areas? People are living in flats. So there is no question of owner-driven reconstruction in the urban areas. We have to give them some other choices. Government of Gujarat provided them a choice of buying ready-built flats also. All these various options should be explored. See, if you want to rebuild faster, you should have a pre-disaster planning for post-disaster reconstruction. So if you can, prior to the disaster, identify areas where people can be shifted with their concurrence, how critical infrastructure can be rebuilt and how fast it can be rebuilt, then you will be able to build much faster. In Gujarat, as far as insurance to the houses are concerned, after reconstruction, at the expense of government, we insured all the newly built houses for 10 years at a very nominal cost of 300 rupees per house. But after 10 years, people did not renew their insurance. I went to those areas and I asked them, why are you not renewing your houses for insurance? They told that, sir, before earthquake, we thought when an earthquake comes, all of us will die. What is the point of taking insurance? Nobody will be benefited. Now government has repeatedly told us, if you follow the norms, the standards set by government, all the houses will be earthquake proof. Now what is the need to take insurance? It is not going to affect us. So the challenge is to keep this momentum and make people understand and buy insurance after the expiry of 10 years period. As rightly said here, Government of Gujarat set up special purpose vehicles. For reconstruction of infrastructure in the urban areas, we set up a new company called Gujarat Urban Development Company, which took care of reconstruction of infrastructure in all the affected towns. For rebuilding the towns, including the houses, we had set up area development authorities. So it is necessary that the subnational government helps the local governments in rebuilding. It is very, very essential. Creation of critical infrastructure can also change the economy of the affected area. Kutch in Gujarat is a classic example. Before the earthquake, it was an industrially backward district. But using this opportunity provided by the disaster, Narmada water was brought to Kutch, new roads were built, Kutch got a new airport. Now the economy of Kutch is totally transformed, and Kutch today is one of the most industrially advanced districts in the state of Gujarat. So with these few remarks, I would like to conclude this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for my delayed schedule, but please join me for giving big hands for the speakers, and let's join for tea break. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Co-Chair, for your valuable inputs and session management. I now welcome everyone for tea, coffee break, and we would reassemble in 15 minutes.